For 3 years in a row, a mother bobcat returned to the exact same spot to give birth. It was the most dangerous place imaginable. A den located right in the middle of a road. When conservation scientists arrived, they were stunned. By all logic, this should have been a fatal mistake. The den was loud, exposed, and sandwiched between vehicles thundering overhead. As they prepared for an emergency relocation, wildlife officers discovered something unprecedented. A revelation that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about wild feline behavior. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Silas McKay felt the grit of the Chihuahuan desert settle into the lines on his face. It was a familiar feeling, as much a part of him as the ache in his left knee or the worn smooth grip of the steering wheel. For 42 years, he'd driven these caliche roads, his truck a slow-moving cloud of dust against the vast, thorny backdrop of the Chaparral Wildlife Management Area. At 67, Silas was in his final month of patrol. Retirement felt less like a relief and more like a quiet eviction. This land, with its headstrong mesquite, prickly pear, and the relentless shimmer of the South Texas sun, was the only partner he'd ever truly understood. He was joined that July afternoon by a kid from Austin, a new intern named Ben, whose face was still shiny with sunscreen and misplaced enthusiasm. "It's really hot, isn't it, Mr. McKay?" Ben said, wiping his brow for the 10th time that hour. Silas grunted, keeping his eyes on the road. "Heat's honest, kid. Tells you exactly what it wants. It's the quiet you gotta watch out for." The Chaparral was humming with the drone of insects and the distant rumble of trucks over on Highway 83. It was the sound of 1,000 tiny engines idling under the sun. They were on the long, straight service road approaching the North Pasture, a stretch of land known for javelina and the occasional fleeting glimpse of a coyote. Silas slowed the truck, his old boots working the brake pedal with practiced ease as they neared an old cattle guard. It was just a grid of steel bars, set in a concrete trough, meant to keep the area's grazing livestock from wandering. The metal hummed as the truck's tires rolled onto the first bars, then stopped. "Why are we stopping?" Ben asked, looking around. "See a dillo?" "Hush," Silas said. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine block. And then he heard it. It wasn't the rattle of a diamondback seeking shade. It wasn't the whisper of wind through the sparse grass. It was something thin. A high-pitched, trembling hiss, like steam from a cracked kettle. "You hear that?" Silas asked, his voice low. Ben strained. "Hear what?" "I just hear the highway." "No, below." Silas grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight from the dash, the metal warm to the touch. He stepped out of the truck, the heat hitting him like a physical blow. He walked to the edge of the cattle guard, the sun glinting off the polished steel bars. He pointed the flashlight beam down into the dark, 4-foot-deep pit. The sound stopped. "Probably just a pack rat, Mr. McKay." "Or a snake," Ben offered, stepping up beside him. "Snake don't sound like that," Silas muttered. He swept the beam through the cobwebs and dust. The bottom was dry earth, littered with blown leaves. And then the beam caught them. Not one reflection, but 5 pairs of tiny, incandescent lights. 5 sets of kitten eyes, bright as new pennies, blinked back at him from the deepest shadow. "My word," Ben whispered, stumbling back a step. Silas held the light steady. curled around the cluster of eyes was a larger shape. A mother bobcat, her spotted tan fur pressed tight against the dusty concrete wall. She wasn't cornered. She wasn't afraid. She was a living shield, her body forming a protective crescent around her litter. She lifted her head, and her own eyes, ancient and amber, met Silas's. She didn't flinch. She didn't bare her teeth or flatten her tufted ears. She simply looked up, a calm, watchful presence, as if she were simply waiting for these two loud, clumsy giants to move along. She's beautiful, Ben breathed. But what is she doing down there? It's a box. She's trapped. No, Silas said, a strange feeling rising in his chest. It was a cocktail of awe and a deep, profound sadness he couldn't name. She's not trapped, kid. I think she's home. The call brought out the biologists. Within an hour, a second truck arrived, this one carrying Dr. Eris Thorne, a young, driven conservation scientist from Texas Parks and Wildlife. Eris was a man of data, drones, and GPS collars. He viewed the chaparral as a complex equation to be solved, while Silas saw it as a story to be read. This is a major anomaly, Silas, Eris said, peering into the pit with a high-powered scope. She's compromised her litter. A flash flood, a predator. Hell, even the exhaust fumes from the trucks. We need to tranquilize and relocate. It's the only responsible protocol. Relocate where? Silas countered, his voice rough. Back to the brush where the coyotes can pick them off one by one? Or a hawk can swoop down? Look at her, Eris. She's not stressed. She's calm. She's an animal, Silas. She's running on instinct. And her instinct in this case is wrong, Eris argued, already pulling a tablet from his bag. She's chosen a high-traffic area. It's a fatal mistake. I don't know, Silas said, shaking his head. Look at those kittens. They're not scrawny. She's been feeding them. She's healthy. She's been coming and going. She knows this place. How could you possibly? Mr. McKay? Dr. Thorne? Ben interrupted, holding up his phone. He'd been reviewing the area's digital logs. We have a motion-activated camera just up the road. It monitors this guard. I was checking the archives. Eris scoffed. And? It probably saw her go in last night. Yeah, Ben said, his eyes wide. It saw her go in last night. And it saw her go in April of last year, and May of the year before that. A heavy silence fell over the group. Eris snatched the phone from Ben. He scrolled, his thumb moving faster and faster, his expression shifting from annoyance to disbelief. He cross-referenced the dates, the timestamps, the metadata. It was her. The facial markings were identical. 3 years in a row, this same female bobcat had returned to this exact man-made steel box to give birth. Eris sat down heavily on the truck's tailgate, the tablet forgotten in his lap. He stared at the grid of steel, then at Silas. But why? Eris whispered. The data had failed him. Bobcats are elusive. They choose hollow logs, deep thickets, rocky crevices. This is the middle of a road. It's loud, it's exposed. It makes no logical sense. Silas leaned against the side of his own truck, folding his arms. He looked past the cattle guard, into the shimmering heat rising from the mesquite. It makes all the sense in the world, Silas said quietly. What's the #1 predator for a bobcat kitten? Coyotes, Eris answered automatically, followed by eagles and great horned owls. Right. And what do coyotes, eagles, and owls hate more than anything? Eris looked at the highway where a semi-trailer roared past, shaking the very ground beneath their feet. Noise, humans, machinery. She didn't find a trap, son, Silas said, the pieces fitting together in his mind, forming a picture of heartbreaking brilliance. She found a fortress. The noise of the trucks, the rumble of the engines. It's a wall of sound. No coyote will come near this road. No owl will hunt this close to the highway. The bars are too narrow for a javelina or a feral hog to get in, and no human ever steps into a cattle guard. He pointed at the steel bars. She's built her nursery in the one place in this entire 15,000-acre refuge that no predator, animal, or human would ever dare to enter. She's using us as her bodyguards. The scientists were stunned. This wasn't a mistake. It was a stroke of genius, born from a place of profound protective instinct. They agreed for now to do nothing but watch. They set up a new high-definition silent camera, camouflaged in a nearby yucca plant, aimed directly into the den. That night, Silas couldn't sleep. He kept thinking of the mother's eyes, that impossible calm. He knew this cat. He'd seen her before. He was sure of it. He went to his old shed, past the empty dog kennel that had belonged to his old hound, Blue, and dug out his physical field journals. He flipped back 4 years. 2021. Winter. He'd found a bobcat caught in a poacher's snare near the northern fence line. She'd been young, terrified, her leg bloody. He'd spent an hour talking to her, his voice a low rumble as he worked the wire loose with his cutters. She'd bolted the second she was free, leaving only a tuft of fur on the wire. He looked at the digital photo Eris had taken that afternoon. A small, pale scar, barely visible, ran along her left front paw. "Matilda," Silas whispered, giving her the name he'd given her back then. The name of his own grandmother, a woman who had raised 5 children alone on this same unforgiving patch of Texas dirt. "You learned, didn't you? You learned what fences and steel can do, both good and bad." The team began a 24-hour remote vigil. The footage that came back was a secret diary of motherhood. They watched Matilda nurse her 5 kittens, her body a warm, spotted pillow. They watched her groom them with a rough, pink tongue, her low purr so deep it was almost felt rather than heard. They watched her leave at the dark blue hour of twilight. She would stand beneath the bars, listening for long, patient minutes. Then, in a movement so fluid it looked like poured water, she would leap, catch the inner lip of the concrete box and haul herself out. She'd disappear into the brush, a silent hunter. Hours later, she would return, usually with a rabbit or a fat wood rat, and drop it into the den for the kittens to investigate. But it was Silas who pieced together the why. He had Eris pull the records for the area surrounding the cattle guard, specifically looking for predation reports from 2022. He found it. A park visitor's report, 3 years prior. A hiker had stumbled upon a ravaged bobcat den in a hollowed log, 2 miles from the highway. The tracks were clear. A pack of coyotes. The story wrote itself in Silas's mind, a heart-wrenching prelude to the triumph they were now witnessing. He imagined Matilda's first litter. Born in the proper place, the perfect textbook den. He imagined the terror of the attack, the desperate snarling fight, the terrible final silence. He imagined her, wounded and alone, realizing that tradition was a trap, that the right way, the way her mother had taught her, had led to a massacre. And so, driven by that primal, unendurable grief, she had sought a new way. She had traded the quiet of the wilderness for the thunder of the highway. She had traded soft earth for cold steel. She had built her new nursery from the scraps of the human world, a place of iron and shadow, and had declared it safe. "She's not just smart, Eris," Silas said, watching the monitor as Matilda nudged a wandering kitten back to the pile. "She's a survivor. She's a refugee, and she's smarter than all of us." The kittens grew. Their eyes, once blue and unfocused, sharpened to the same amber gold as their mother's. They began to play, tumbling over each other in the dusty leaves, batting at their mother's flicking, black-tipped tail. The cattle guard, their steel fortress, was the only world they knew. The roar of a passing truck was their lullaby. Then the weather turned. A low-pressure system, bloated with moisture from the Gulf, stalled over South Texas. The sky turned a sickly, bruised green. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. "That's a gully washer," Silas said, staring at the radar on Eris's laptop. The camp was being pelted with horizontal rain. "The den," Eris said, his face pale. "It's a concrete box, Silas. It's a drainage culvert." They were in the truck in seconds, Ben in the back, rocketing down the service road that was quickly turning to slick red mud. The wind howled, and the first flashes of lightning cracked the sky, striking the horizon with terrifying spidery light. When they reached the cattle guard, Silas's heart seized. It wasn't a den, it was a bathtub, and it was filling fast. A torrent of brown, churning water, thick with leaves and debris, was pouring into the pit. Eris grabbed a crowbar from the truck bed. "We have to pull the grate. We have to get them out now." "No! Wait!" Silas shouted over the wind, grabbing his flashlight. He aimed the beam into the churning chaos. The water was already 2 feet deep and rising. But Matilda wasn't panicking. She was in the center of the pit, clinging to the steel support beams under the road. She had wedged her body against the I-beam, and one by one she was moving her kittens. The water swirled and tugged at her, but she was immovable. She was placing them on the highest, driest part of the steel framework, just inches below the roaring tires of the trucks passing overhead, oblivious to the drama. One of the kittens, the smallest, slipped. It let out a terrified hiss and fell into the swirling water. "That's it! I'm going in!" Eris yelled, prying at the grate. "Stop!" Silas roared, grabbing his arm. "Look!" Before the kitten could be swept away, Matilda lunged. She plunged her head underwater and snatched the kitten by the scruff of its neck. With a powerful heave, she pulled it back up, shook the water from its face, and placed it firmly with its siblings. She then jammed her own body in front of them, taking the full force of the incoming water, a living breakwater. She was soaked. She was trembling from the cold and the exertion. But she held. Silas, Eris, and Ben stood in the pouring rain, paralyzed. They watched for an hour as the storm raged. They watched this mother, trapped between a flash flood below and a highway above, refuse to surrender. She had chosen this place, and she would defend it, or she would die with her young. Just as the water lapped at the beam where the kittens were huddled, the rain, as if a switch had been thrown, lightened. The deluge slowed to a downpour, then a drizzle, then stopped. The water level held, then, ever so slowly, began to recede. The 3 men didn't speak. They were soaked to the bone, but none of them moved. They just watched as Matilda, her body vibrating with exhaustion, began the long process of licking her 5 kittens dry, one by one. Eris slowly lowered the crowbar. "My God," he whispered. She accounted for this. She knew the high ground within the den. Silas just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He'd seen a lot of brave things in the wild, but he'd never seen anything like this. They left her in peace. The sun returned the next day, and the pit dried out, leaving behind a muddy bathtub ring on the concrete walls. And then, a week later, the nursery was empty. Eris, frantic, thought the worst. The storm must have weakened them. Maybe she moved them and they didn't make it. Maybe a predator was waiting. "Just check the footage, son," Silas said, already knowing what he'd see. Eris pulled the video from the night before. The camera, in its silent infrared vision, captured the moment. The kittens, now strong and leggy, were restless. Their world was too small. Matilda, under the cover of a half-moon, leaped from the den. She didn't leave. She stood on the side of the road, calling to them with a soft, chirping grunt. One by one, the 5 kittens, clumsy and brave, struggled to make the same impossible leap their mother did. They'd scramble, fall, and try again, until at last, all 5 stood beside her on the gravel shoulder. Then, the extraordinary happened. Before leading them into the safety of the brush, Matilda turned. She walked directly toward the hidden yucca plant. She stopped, 10 feet from the lens, and stared directly into it. It was, Silas knew, impossible. She couldn't know the camera was there. It was a coincidence. But as he looked at her face on the monitor, at those knowing amber eyes, he felt it. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It was a look of acknowledgement, a silent, mutual agreement between one survivor and another. "I see you. You see me. The truce is over." And with a flick of her tail, she turned. One by one, she nudged her kittens into the shadows of the mesquite, disappearing into the wild, leaving the highway and its strange steel cradle behind. Silas and Eris drove out to the cattle guard. It was just an empty, ugly piece of road infrastructure again. Silas knelt, his bad knee cracking in protest. He reached down through the bars. There, caught on a rough weld, was a single tuft of spotted fur, a farewell written in steel. Silas's retirement party was a quiet affair. Ben gave him a framed photo of the cattle guard, and Eris gave him a copy of the preliminary paper he was writing. It wasn't just about anomalous behavior. The title was A Fortress of Instinct, Adaptive Maternal Strategies in Lynx Rufus. "She taught me more in 3 weeks than I learned in 6 years of grad school," Eris admitted, shaking the old man's hand. Silas nodded. "Let him be. That's the best science there is." Months later, Silas, now a civilian, was back at the chaparral, volunteering to help clear invasive plants. Eris found him, his truck kicking up the same familiar dust. He didn't say anything. He just handed Silas a pair of binoculars and pointed. Across the valley, on a rocky outcrop bathed in the gold of the late afternoon, she sat. Matilda. Sleek, healthy, and alert. And tumbling around her, playing, hunting, and stalking each other through the Ocotillo, were 5 healthy, nearly grown bobcats. The legacy of the cattle guard. The latest generation of a wild Texas mother who had stared down trauma, flood, and the modern world, and had won. Silas put the binoculars down, the grit back in his eyes. But this time, it wasn't just dust. He smiled. The chaparral was in good hands.